My name is James Matson, and I'm the Clinical Operations Manager of IM Clinic in Denver, Colorado. So we are a clinic that works primarily with gender and sexuality. And in my background, I did my undergrad in comparative religion and then got my master's through a seminary. And so I've really specialized in the intersection of spirituality and sexuality and how those work together, especially in the area of gender with kids. So a big number of my clients have been teenagers, young kids and teenagers who are coming out as trans or gender non-binary or gender creative and are interacting with religious parents. And so I've worked a lot with parents who are trying to figure out how do I engage with my kid with this, and a lot with kids on how do I engage with my own faith and understanding who I am. And so I think there are a few things that can feel a little bit confusing for parents sometimes, but I think are important to keep in mind and to kind of take note of. And so the first one, and it seems a little bit obvious, but the first point is that parents can have a significant impact on the way that their kids have a relationship with God. So if we take a step back for a second, kids learn how to be in relationship with a higher power through the dynamics that they have with their parents. And so mom and dad or primary caregiver serves as that major model for what this higher power, this authority point is. And that's both implicit and explicit. And so it's the lessons that you're teaching your kids, that you're saying to them about the faith, but it's also the way that they watch you interact with each other and interact with them. So one of the dynamics that can happen sometimes is that kids can learn that they have to take care of their parents. And so what happens with that is that if I feel like something about myself, something about my identity, something about my experience upsets mom or dad, then what I start to do is create these two piles. One pile is clean, one pile is dirty. And the things that go in the clean pile are going to be things that I'm willing to share, that I tend to play up, that I make a really big piece of myself. And the things that are in the dirty pile, I keep hidden. There are things that I learned that I can't show anyone, that I can't engage with, and that a lot of times I'm going to try to make not be there at all. And so, what we really learn to do with that is that my value to you in relationships starts to be based on my performance. It's based on how well I can play up these good sides of myself and keep hidden the bad sides. What happens is that kids can apply that to God, and we can create a similar dynamic to God. That I learned that God will love me or approve of me, or I will be valuable to God when I can please Him, when my behavior looks good, and I fit kind of the model that I'm supposed to fit. That's when I am good or holy or righteous. And so a lot of times what it leads to is kids that really swallow their own identities. Even if they're willing to come out, it tends to be a place of confusion and a little bit of hesitation. And I think the other piece within that is that when I feel like I have to caretake my parent, that your emotional well-being is dependent on my performance, my behavior, I believe the same is true of God. That God's approval of me, or me keeping God happy, which is a major goal that I feel like I have to do, is really dependent on the way that I can perform well or not. I think one of the things that can come from that, and the second point in that, is that when I feel like my performance is the foundation for my success with my relationship with God, it can create basically fear that looks a lot like devotion. And so kids can look like they're pouring themselves very strongly into this faith and living in a way that they want to try to be as pleasing to God as possible. But a lot of times it comes from a fear of salvation or a fear of not being good enough, not measuring up. And so the shift that happens from parents to God is that parents have authority. They have impact on your kids' lives. But God is seen as this ultimate authority. And so it's a step even further that it's not just me trying to please mom and dad so that I have value to them, so that I am loved and worthy. It's a fear that if I don't perform well enough, that I will go to hell, or there's this risk of eternal damnation. And so a lot of times what we see is kids feel like they need to perform in these specific ways in order to make sure that they are safe eternally. And especially with younger kids in earlier developmental stages, the understanding of hell and sin and all of these things don't necessarily feel as concrete as they might to a parent or older child. And so it's a little hard to understand. And so really it's this kind of shapeless, nameless fear of I'm afraid that I'm going to go to hell and I don't know what that is. And so I put so much emphasis on doing the right thing and acting in the right way that I can really lose the ability to bring all of who I am to these places. There is some really interesting research out there that looks at how do kids engage with faith, how do they learn faith, and I believe this study was out of New Zealand. I'm not positive, but they did some research on children learning faith structures and how they function throughout their lifetimes. And what they found is that kids who were raised with strong ideologies, whether specifically religious or more social ideologies, by the time that kid is about 7 years old, that is so entrenched in them that it actually functions similarly to instinct. And so even if you learn that, hey, this lesson that I got may not be totally accurate, it still hits on an instinctive level. And so a lot of times what we're going to see out of that is shame. We're going to see a lot of stigma. We're going to see a lot of internal reactions, even if I've developed past the place to know, hey, that's not necessarily true, or I don't actually believe that anymore. A lot of times we get a very strong internal reaction that feels so intense without really knowing where it comes from. And it comes from those lessons really on in life. Building on the idea that we can learn to please, or that our value comes from how well we can please God. One of the other things to keep in mind, a next point, is that emphasis in religion on self-sacrifice can lead kids to a pretty internalized sense of stigma. And so with most faiths, most faith structures, there's an emphasis that you should be serving others, that you should put other people's needs before your own. And that's kind of a universal theme of self-sacrifice and self-serving. The issue is that when we build on the stuff that we've already talked about, kids learn that their appropriate role within relationship is to be a martyr, that I am sacrificing myself so deeply to make sure that I'm taking care of you, that your needs are met, that I can start to align with the other person, or the other God, the other, more than I align with myself. And when I start to do that, I self-sacrifice to a point that I start to believe that there is something bad or wrong with the needs that I have. And so it leads to that strong separation, and it leads to an even stronger separation, that I feel like I can't engage with myself and still be okay. I think it's really important to note that emphasis on self-sacrifice is not bad. It is a good thing to teach kids to be selfless and to take care of each other and to be considerate. I think the balance within that is that we have to teach kids to also be assertive. They have to be able to hold boundaries. They have to be able to ask questions and do the both and. That yes, you are important and so am I, as opposed to making a structure that says you are more important. Another point that can be really important for parents to understand is that even though your faith community may be very open and very accepting, most faiths are pretty binary in a lot of ways. That we look at various creation stories across various religions, and a lot of them have a strong emphasis on male and female. And for a kid that doesn't strongly align with either of those two categories, or feels like they're still trying to navigate that experience can be really isolating. It leads to a sense of, how do I fit into this structure? How do I fit into the world? How do I fit into the family, into the community? Because I don't follow one of those two patterns. And we see it socially with kids, but when we throw in that religious or faith lens, it becomes even stronger. Because if this is the way that we are taught or believe that we are supposed to act in the world, and I don't fit either of those options, it leaves me in a really big void about what does devotion look like for me? How do I live righteously? How do I live in a way that doesn't directly mirror one of the models that I've been given? And so what we as parents can do is really step into that space and start to have a dialogue about, how do you see yourself fitting into this, and where is the historical context of these stories? Identifying that there's messages and that there's things within them that are really important. And just because this is all that this holy book covers doesn't mean that this is all that there is. And so starting to engage with your kids around, what is it like for you to hear this story of Adam and Eve, for example, when you don't really fit into either? And why don't we focus on the commonality of that, the unity of Adam and Eve, and within that creation story, the unity of God with Adam, and the unity of Eve with Adam, that we all actually come from a common source. And so identifying that you may not fit into A or B, male or female, that might not be who you are, but you still have just as much of the divine in you as someone who does fall into one of those two categories. It's just a different expression of God's creativity, so to speak. And I think within this, it can be easy for parents to feel like they're out of their depth. It can be easy to feel like there's way too much data, there's too much information, I don't really know where to go with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with bringing in a resource or going, hey, I think that this person might be better equipped to have this conversation with us. What that really does is it can emphasize and reinforce things that are already present within that faith structure. When I have questions about my faith that I can't understand myself, I can't figure out, I go to my pastor, I go to my priest, I go to someone who has more training and understanding than I do, and I ask, I get some guidance there. The same thing happens just because we're talking about more of a queer theology, so to speak. It doesn't mean that I have to figure it out on my own, or that I as a parent have to figure it out for my kids. There are a lot of resources available. And you as a parent get to decide what level of comfort you have around this. There is amazing exegesis that goes into passages and words and really unpacks in details, what do these mean and how do these work, with a different approach to theology. And there are some that are more topical. It's a little bit more general about, how do we see God's diversity playing out in the world as we're experiencing it now. And so it's really important to tailor your answers to the questions that your kids are asking. Sometimes, as a parent, kid asks a question, and I go, "Oh, I need to give you all the information," or that may not be developmentally appropriate. So knowing it's okay not to give all of the details right off the bat, but I can answer the question that you're asking and then ask you if it feels like it's good enough. And if it doesn't, chances are pretty high your kid is going to come back and say, yeah, but I still don't understand this. And so allowing them to really guide that conversation, allowing them to guide the questioning as it occurs, takes some of the pressure off the parents, but also gives the kid a lot of empowerment of this is your faith. This isn't just something that mom or dad or the pastor is saying. This is something that you get to own and you get to engage with by yourself and figure out how you believe it, how it looks for you. Um, Mom and dad are going to help with that. We're going to come alongside and support you with that. But ultimately, you get to ask the questions, and I'm going to stop